Hello friends, Tal here, and welcome to the 7.1.5 Brewmaster Monk Guide. We're going to be taking a look at how the monk plays, what you need to know to be an effective brewmaster, and just talking about the spells, talents, abilities, all that kind of stuff in as much of a concise manner as I can get while still being educational. Sorry again, it's a little bit more boring than the Guardian and the Vengeance Demon Hunter Wide. There's no crazy dungeon footage, but I wanted to make sure because concerns were raised in those videos that I wasn't giving the entire depth of like an analysis of the spells and everything because I made prior videos to that. But anyways, we're just going to jump right into it. The Brewmaster Monk, how does it work? Essentially, it works on a charge system for their brews. You have two brews that you need to manage that give you stagger, the ability to stagger a lot of damage that you take, which essentially is, let's say you have 50% stagger, an attack hits you for 100, you take 50 instantly, and 50 damage is taken over 10 seconds. So in total, that's 100 damage you're still taking, but half of it is instant, and the other half of it is a dot over time that ramps up. That's stagger, and then you have a different brew that will clear a percentage of that stagger away. So essentially the way that the Brewmaster works is that they can mitigate very large hits on them initially, and then they can either choose to allow the dot to roll on them or to clear it off and reduce a lot of damage taken in that fashion. So let's go ahead and just jump into the actual spells and give you a better idea of how those mechanics and things play out in actual gameplay. As far as stats go, you're going to be taking a look at getting enough haste to get a sufficient number of brews. We'll get more into brews in a little bit, but basically you want to try to shoot for at least 15% haste and then a little bit more or a little bit less depending on how you feel. Essentially, you have 3 charges of your brews: Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew, and as you can see, it's reduced by haste. It's 15% at least, and then to your liking. I can tell you that right now at 20% haste, I feel like maybe I have a little too much haste and I could put that stats into other avenues, but basically it's kind of a preference choice for how you play your Brewmaster and the necessity of those brew charges depending on what fights you're doing, which is actually very, very important. One thing that you're going to learn about the Brewmaster as we talk about it is it's about control. That's what this tank class is all about, controlling your intake depending on what you need. Besides the haste though, you then go into versatility, mastery, and then a little bit more haste up to 33.4%. That's like the max amount of haste you want to possibly have. And then critical strike. That's for a defensive Brewmaster build. Those are your stats that you basically want to shoot for. Now, before I continue, I just want to go ahead and let you guys know that I'm going to be putting in the description a link to not only the MMO Champion forum thread for Brewmasters, where there's a lot of discussion, but as well I'm going to be linking to Wowhead so that you can see the artifact progression path, as well as a discussion on Legendaries and things of that nature you might find interesting. I like linking to these other resources because I want to show you guys where I get my information. It's not just me playing, it's also me listening to these people that have a lot of time and math spent on the game and the classes and specs. But as you can see, I have my entire artifact maxed out, even my 35th point, and they'll be able to show you the path and explain why you take those paths. That being said, let's jump right into the spellbook. Now, I'm going to be skipping talents, so the very first thing that I think you need to know is your artifact spell. Your artifact spell is the Exploding Keg. It has a 40-yard range, it's a 1.25 minute cooldown, you hurl a flaming keg, you do damage, and you cause them to miss their next melee attacks for the next 3 seconds. So, it looks like this. Something you need to keep in mind is it has a huge travel distance. It's not fun, in my opinion, but as you can see here, yeah, that takes a while. That's at maximum distance. That was like, what, 3-4 seconds or so of travel time? Kind of sucks, but it makes them miss all their melee attacks for the next 3 seconds. And on any bosses that hit very, very quickly, or AoE, so a lot of bosses, a lot of mobs and stuff, it's a very, very powerful mitigation tool that you should keep in mind. And it does work for other tanks, so it makes them miss their attacks. You can make them miss attacks on you and your co-tank. Next up, you have Expel Harm. It's 15 energy. It's an instant cast spell, and what it does is it draws in all your healing spells and it causes you to expel negative chi, damaging the nearest enemy for 10% of the amount healed. Passively, you generate these healing orbs around you that you can walk over. They're yellow, give you a certain amount of healing, but then you have Expel Harm to pull them into you if you need that healing on demand, but you don't want to move the boss or move around to collect those orbs because they might be too far away. Something to keep in mind. Then you have Blackout Strike. This is reduced by haste, but essentially it's like a filler. You want to use this every once in a while. It does a decent amount of damage. It's not a priority unless you take Blackout Combo, but it's something that you weave in between all your spells. Next up you have Breath of Fire, 15-second cooldown. You breathe fire damage in front of you, and then targets affected by Keg Smash will also burn for a fire dot. Pretty simple, pretty basic, just does damage. Then you have your big cooldown. Now this is a bit of a point of contention. This is Fortifying Brew, a 7-minute cooldown. It turns your skin to stone for 15 seconds, increasing your current and maximum health by 20%, increasing the damage you delay with Stagger by an additional 26%, and reducing all damage you take by 20%. Ridiculously powerful cooldown, but given a 7-minute cooldown. This is reduced by anything that will reduce the cooldown on your brews. Keep that in mind. In reality, in practice, it ends up being that with good play, you have this at about a 4-minute cooldown. But you should keep in mind that unless you use it a little bit early into the encounter, you have a good chance of not getting a second use of it because of how long it takes to get it back down to a reasonable time limit, basically. Now you still have access to Crackling Jade Lightning. It's 20 energy plus 20 per second. It's really only great at pulling things instantly to you, doing a little bit of AoE threat or long distance threat or damage. Something to keep in mind, but it will entirely use up your energy bar very quickly. You still have access to Detox. It's an 8-second cooldown, removes poison disease effects from you, which is actually very, very useful. A lot of times you can just cleanse yourself and not have to worry about certain mechanics, and it does work in some raid instances if the debuff is not classified as a magic debuff. Alright, and now you come to what is possibly the most important spell in your entire spellbook, Iron Skin Brew. You have 3 charges of brews, that is Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew. What Iron Skin Brew does is it increases the damage you delay with Stagger by an additional 40% for 7.5 seconds. Basically, you stagger a certain amount of damage every time you get hit. We can see that the passive is Stagger. You shrug off attacks, delaying 40% of physical damage instead taking it over 10 seconds. Affects magical attacks at 50% effectiveness. And when you use Iron Skin Brew, you're going to have a massive amount of Stagger. So a lot of the damage that you're going to be taking as a Brewmaster Monk is going to be from the dot that you create through Stagger. Unless you play like shit, in which case you're taking it right to the face. Don't take it to the face. This is a spell that is designed to be up 100% of the time that you are actively tanking anything. Okay? If you are getting hit and you do not have Iron Skin Brew up, that is the very first point that you have to address and the very first thing you have to fix in your playstyle. 100% uptime if you are getting hit, no excuses. Now you have access to a fuse. It's 30 energy. It's a fast spell that heals you. It heals for shit. This is something that you want to cast on yourself, sure, but I would almost dare say that buying food and eating it after an encounter would be better than using a fuse. But of course, if you're standing off to the side, maybe you're not taking damage, maybe your cold tank is getting smashed in the face, sure, cast it, why not? It's not a big heal, don't worry about it. It's interesting because this is actually going to become a part of your core rotation in 7.2 if tier bonuses stay the way they're looking. So just keep that in mind. It's not useful now, but maybe in a month or two. And then you have Keg Smash, your big rotational spell. Its cooldown is reduced by haste. It has a 40 energy cost, 25 yard range, and you smash a keg of brew on your target, including like all targets around you, so it's a massive AoE damage boost, the spike that it does, and it reduces their movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. This is the dot that Breath of Fire will ignite to create a damage dot over time. Keep that in mind. But it's also going to reduce the remaining cooldown on your brews by 4 seconds. All your brews. If the spell has the name Brew in it, which if you're astute, you can see that Black Ox Brew, that's a talent. If it has the word Brew in it, it reduces it by 4 seconds. Fortifying Brew, Iron Skin Brew, Black Ox Brew, Purifying Brew. Next up, you still have your CC Paralysis, 15-second cooldown, 20 yard range, 20 energy. Just basically incapacitate something for a minute. You still have your Interrupt, 15-second cooldown, standard melee interrupt, you want to use it. Your provoke is the only taunt that baseline causes an enemy to move at you faster. Nice little bit of utility there. Warriors can talent into a similar effect, but otherwise you are the only tank with that effect on your taunt. And then Tiger Palm. Tiger Palm is another rotational ability you want to use often to not energy cap, but not so much that you don't have energy for Keg Smash. It's 25 energy, you do a little bit of damage, and you reduce the remaining cooldown on all of your brews by 1 second. And then you come over to Purifying Brew. Purifying Brew will clear 50% of the damage you delay with Stagger, and it shares charges with Iron Skin Brew. This is the other half of your mitigation. When you are taking damage, you go through 3 stages of Stagger. Green, yellow, and red, with red being heavy stagger, yellow being medium, and green being light. When you are at light stagger, you don't really want to, purify it off, because you're going to be purifying 50% of a little bit. When you're at red stagger, you want to be purifying because you're purifying 50% of a lot. See how that works out? Nice simple terms. Essentially what it does, it's a UI element that you'll see if you just take damage. If you've been playing a Brewmaster at all, you've noticed it. It's like little green circles around your character, half circles, then it becomes bigger with yellow and then really big with red. The thing about Purifying Brew though is that it is 50%. If you can track how much stagger damage you're taking, you can purify really, really massive, like million damage hits, because they'll hit you. A large part of it will become a dot, and then you can purify immediately and just wipe the board clear with most of that damage. Super, super interesting, and again, plays into that level of control that you have as a Brewmaster. You still have Resuscitate, pretty standard. Transcendence and Transcendent Transfer are part of the utility of a monk. You put down a clone, and then when you're within a certain distance, you can teleport back to it. There's no cast time, you can be in the air when you use it. It leaves another clone in that area. The Transcendence cast is 10 seconds, and then transferring is 25 seconds. Really, really cool, fun utility. I don't have anything negative to say about it. There's a lot of times when you can use this to abuse, or not abuse, but to make your life easier. And then you have access to roll, one of my favorite spells in the entire game. You roll a short distance. People have always told me that warriors have so much mobility. No, not even. I wouldn't even say demon hunters have as much mobility as monks. Demon hunter tanks, mind you, because they have the heroic leap that they have, and sure, they have glide. But as a monk, I can have 2 charges of roll, I can have Tiger's Lust, I can have Transcendence Transfer. It's fantastic. What else can I say? And then you have an interesting cooldown in Zen Meditation. Now, baseline, this is 5 minutes. It's going to reduce all damage you take by 60% for 8 seconds. Moving, being hit by a melee attack, or taking another action will cancel this effect. So if you get booped somewhere because of a mechanic, it will also cancel it. The thing about Zen Meditation is that looking at it, you really only think, okay, this is to soak a large magical hit, right? But you can soak a large melee hit. It's just going to be canceled immediately. Using this spell intelligently is going to distinguish you a good monk from a great monk. But particularly, there's a legendary that we can just go ahead and talk about now that makes Zen Meditation even better. Let's see, it is the Helm. So the Helm, the fundamental observation, Zen Meditation has a 50% reduced cooldown, so it becomes a 2.5 minute cooldown, very short, and is no longer cancelled when you move or when you're hit by melee attacks. If you get a chance to get this legendary, fantastic, great on you, lucky you, and it becomes a much more powerful cooldown than it is baseline. But even now, even at 5 minutes, even with the restriction of 1 melee attacker being moved or anything like that, it's still very, very strong. You just have to intelligently use it. Zen Pilgrimage just takes you to your class order hole, essentially. Celestial Fortune is a passive that you have as a Brewmaster. You have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to be healed for an additional 65% of the amount healed. It's similar to the mastery that Guardian Druids have, but it is based on your crit, which unless you're trying to be more DPS focused, you don't really want to have too much crit, but it is a nice little additional bonus. Sometimes heals will heal you for more. That's all it is. And the Gift of the Ox, this is what passively spawns healing orbs around you. When you take damage, you have a chance to summon a healing sphere visible only to you. Moving through this healing sphere heals you for a certain amount. It just happens randomly. When the spell first came out, and there was a lot of discussion between Gift of the Ox and the way that Gift of the Mist it basically was created. I know that at one point Gift of the Ox was when you take enough damage that equals your health pool, then you summon one sphere, and just all this crazy stuff about it. And honestly, when you start talking even about the artifact and things that does, because there's a bunch of Gift of the Ox affecting traits in here, it gets a little messy. Honestly, for being totally honest, it gets a little messy. It's not really worth going into too much. Just know you summon healing spheres around you. That's all you really gotta know. Your mastery again is Elusive Brawler. When you are hit by a melee attack, you gain a stacking 18% increased dodge chance until your next successful dodge. Basically, every 3 or 4 hits or so, you dodge an attack. Nothing that you really want to worry about too much. It's just a thing that happens. And then we already talked about Stagger. So those are all the spells. That's basically how Brewmasters, essentially. And now we get into the talents. So the very first tier is going to be a choice between Chi Burst, which is a 30-second cooldown. It's like a Kamehameha wave, essentially. You can see right there, it's a very cool effect, and you just shoot it forward. And what it does is it does damage and heals you and your allies. It does not prevent you avoiding attacks. So even though you're casting a spell, you can't auto attack, you're still able to dodge, is what it's saying there. Then you have Eye of the Tiger, which is Tiger Palm, which is a filler that you're going to be using again. Remember, applies Eye of the Tiger, dealing nature damage and healing you over 8 seconds. Then you have Chi Wave, which is like a little light blue thing that'll just jump around between you and between friendlies and enemies, healing and doing damage depending on who it touches. For the most part, if it's a single target encounter, you want to just go ahead and use Eye of the Tiger. If it's AoE, or if you want to have a large burst of healing for your raid, you take Chi Burst. Nothing too much to think about there. In the 30 tier, you have a movement option. This is personal preference, okay? I love Tiger's Lust, and I love being able to cast Tiger's Lust on an ally because it's a 30-second cooldown, 20-yard range, and it increases your or a friendly target's movement speed by 70% for 6 seconds and removes all roots and snares. But you have choice. Chi Torpedo replaces your roll. It's going to make you roll even further and give you a stacking 30% movement speed bonus for 10 seconds. Or you have Celerity, which is going to reduce the cooldown of roll by 5 seconds and increase its maximum number of charges. It's up to you. I live and die by Tiger's Lust personally, because I like the fact that it's a speed boost to me and I can go where I want to. I don't have to roll, while the other two are tied to whatever distance or trouble you can get into with roll, which, I mean, if you've played a monk, any monk, you've rolled off something at one point and killed yourself, so we all know about that. But it's personal preference. At the 45 tier, I am of the opinion that there is really one way to play this. In almost every single scenario, besides maybe outdoor world quest content, you want to take Black Ox Brew. This is a 1.5 minute cooldown because it is a brew that is reduced by Keg Smash and Tiger Palm, and it's going to instantly refill your energy and your Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew charges. Now keep in mind, this is a waste of energy. There's no argument about that. It just is. You waste energy, you will energy cap, and so be it. That's not the point of this. The point of this is giving you your brew charges back. It provides you 2 things. Number 1, it allows you that when you start the fight, you spam all your Iron Skin Brew charges, and then use this, grab them again, spam them again, and then reduce the cooldown of those brew charges, as well as the Black Ox Brew with Keg Smash, Tiger Palm, all that jazz. It allows you to bank up a large amount of Iron Skin Brew in the beginning of a fight, build upon it in the middle of a fight, and then have Iron Skin Brew Purifying Brew charges for whenever you dip into Red Stagger. It's likely that when you start a fight, you're not going to be at Red Stagger immediately unless something has gone horrifically wrong. So you want to bank up Iron Skin Brew charges or Iron Skin Brew time as much as you can, because you can't get into 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minutes of Iron Skin Brew up on yourself, and then just use the rest of it on Purifying Brew, so you're able to reduce a lot of the damage that you take when you need it to. And in general, if you just need brew charges for specific things, Spellblade Talrial comes to mind. If you are tanking a large numbers of annihilates, you are able to combine this with Blackout combo to some very powerful effects. That being said, we're going to talk about the other 2 choices and talk about why they're not good. You have Light Brewing, which is going to reduce the cooldown Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew by 3 seconds and increase their maximum number of charges by 1. this gives you more brews. And you might think that it's a passive choice, so it's better and it makes it an easier way of getting brews charges, right? You're right, but overall, you're going to be having more charges with Black Ox Brew. And I don't think that it would be a good idea to learn how to play with light brewing when Black Ox Brew is so much more optimal. So this is a much more passive, but also less output choice than Black Ox Brew. And then Gift of the Mist is going to increase the Gift of the Ox chance to trigger based on your remaining health. Gift of the Ox, again, is just healing spheres. It gives you some healing. It's nice, but it's not something that you really want to go into too much. If I'm doing outdoor world content, sometimes I'll go this just for the additional healing, because as a Brewmaster monk, you honestly don't have a lot of self-healing. You are a little bit reliant on healers. You will see that if you're playing your Brewmaster monk, you're going to be at like half to low health constantly, and there's going to be a healing sphere that triggers when you're at low health. It keeps you kind of in the middle. So I like to take Gift of the Mist for that, but anywhere else, it's Black Ox Brew 100% of the time. At 60, you have Ring of Peace, 45-second cooldown, 40-yard range. You can choose a target location for 8 seconds. Enemies that enter will be ejected from the ring. As a tank, things that blow enemies away is really fucking annoying. So I don't see any tanks really taking Ring of Peace at many times. But it's a choice that you have to kind of just push things away from you or from friendly targets. You have Black Ox Statue, Dave, as I and many other Brewmasters affectionately call him. You summon a statue, 10-second cooldown, 40-yard range. It's going to pulse AoE threat, and you can taunt your statue to AoE taunt everything around the statue. Fantastic ability. It used to be baseline. I cry every single night that Dave is gone. But you can choose him, and he's pretty fucking cool. Summons a Black Ox Statue, and he just starts taunting everything around. They actually put me into combat. The other choice is Leg Sweep. Leg Sweep is a 45-second cooldown and AoE stun for 5 seconds. Depending on the encounter, if you need a big AoE stun, you go for Leg Sweep. If not, you take Black Ox Statue. Simple. On the 75 tier, it's going to heavily depend on what you're doing. Healing Elixir, with the most recent changes to Dampen Magic, or Dampen Harm and Mystical Vitality, is not seeing as much play when it comes to like raiding in dungeons and such, because all it does, it's a 30-second recharge, 2 charges. You drink a healing elixir, healing you for 15% of your maximum health, and if you dip below 35% health, it automatically triggers if a charge is available. This is good for, again, outdoor content. Just solo play is nice to have that additional heal, but it's outclassed by the 2 other options. Mystic Vitality is definitely what you choose when there's a lot of heavy magic damage. We're talking Star Augur, right? It's going to stagger is 40% more effective against magical attacks. You're still not going to have the same level of physical damage reduction, because it's not like 40 plus 40 is 80. It's like 40 times, 40 multiplicative or math, something math. It's something maths with the other 40, and it doesn't become 80. It becomes less, like maybe like 60 or something. I can't explain it. It's math. I'm terrible at math, if you guys already know. But this is what you choose when you're doing heavy magical damage fights. But then you have Dampen Harm. It's a 2-minute cooldown. This one has a lot of flexibility because it works on physical and magical damage. It reduces all damage you take by 20% to 50% for 10 seconds, with larger attacks being reduced by more. So if something hits you like a motherfucking truck, you're reducing damage for 50% while it's hitting you like a motherfucking truck. But if something's hitting you for very small amounts, it's reducing that by 20%. So if you have multiple things hitting you, some hitting you hard, some hitting you low, it's going to be between 50 and 20 on every single one of those hits. It's a good cooldown. It just depends on if you need a big cooldown for big hits or specific mechanics, or if you want the magic damage reduction over the course of a fight. On the 90 tier, you have what is essentially the more, I guess I want to say it's the best choice, and then the kind of like take this because there's not a lot of AoE damage choice. So Special Delivery is what you're going to be taking almost 100% of the time. When you drink Iron Skin or Purifying Brew, it has a 30% chance to toss a keg high into the air, and it lands after 3 seconds, dealing AoE damage and reducing the movement speed. It's like you're casting a keg smash into the air and it drops down and does damage. This is the best choice for damage and best all-around choice. The problem is, you don't have Spinning Crane Kick or any spammable AoE. This is RNG. If Keg Smash is on cooldown, and you don't have obviously Special Delivery doesn't proc, you don't have a way to get aggro on AoE in a snap. You'd have to take Chi Burst, or you'd have to have already taken a Blackhawk statue. That's why in certain times and scenarios, like dungeons, I like to take Rushing Jade Wind. It's reduced by haste, the cooldown, it doesn't cost you anything, and it's going to summon a whirlwind that just does damage. AoE scenarios, this will do less damage than Special Delivery, and it causes you to have to press another button. Monks are already sort of global cooldown capped because there's always something to press, and especially if you take Blackout Combo, which is the ideal choice, you always have something to press. So it kind of is bad in that scenario, but it's your only snap AoE spammable thing that you have. And then you have Niuzao, the Black Ox. This spell is terrible. Don't choose it unless you just like how it looks. It basically, we used to be able to summon Zuen. I forgot his name. One expansion, that's all it took, and I forgot his name. We used to be able to summon Zuen, who would just do a little bit of AoE damage and was a single target damage choice. This is the same thing. He just does a little bit of damage. He taunts it. He stomps. It's a cool looking spell, but it's just a bad choice. Even damage wise, it's not ideal. I think they'd have to buff him a lot to make it even semi worthwhile. And then you have the 100 tier with 3 very distinct different flavors, but 2 only really useful ones, right? So high tolerance is what you take when you're learning your Brewmaster. If you're just trying to figure out how the brews and everything works together, you take high tolerance. Stagger delays an additional 10% of incoming damage, and you gain up to 15% haste based on your current level of stagger. Obviously, this is something that you can also take if you're under geared. It's going to be giving you a lot of the haste that you need to keep up your brew charges. If you're a little more experienced with the Brewmaster though, you take Blackout Combo. Now, understand that this makes the rotation a lot more complicated. You have to really pay attention to what you're doing. You should already be using Blackout Strike on cooldown, but this adds another element to it that makes it so that you have to use specific spells after your Blackout Combo to maximize your effect. Blackout Strike empowers your next ability. If your next ability is Tiger Palm, it increases the damage by 200%. If your next ability is Breath of Fire, it reduces the cooldown of Breath of Fire by 6 seconds. If it's Keg Smash, you reduce the remaining cooldown on your brews by an additional 2 seconds. When you use Blackout Combo, you almost always want to use an empowered Keg Smash. There's almost no reason why you should ever delay it. You want to empower that Keg Smash, reduce the cooldown of your brews even more. If you use Iron Skin Brew, you pause your stagger damage for 3 seconds. You can have a gigantic, massive stagger dot on you, and you just pause it. 3 seconds, you won't take that damage. You'll still be getting hit in the face, you'll still be building a stagger dot, but you won't take that damage. That's crazy powerful, and that's one of those combos that you can take with Black Ox Brew on things like Spellblade Talrial, because you can Black Ox Brew, Blackout Combo. No, I'm sorry, let me say that again. You can have your 3 charges, you can Blackout Strike, Iron Skin Brew to pause damage, Purify, Black Ox Combo, Blackout Strike, Iron Skin Brew, stop damage, Purify. And you stop all damage that's coming in on you from the dot, and you clear it twice, reducing damage you take by a massive amount. And then you have Purifying Brew, grants you a strike of Elusive Brew, which is your Elusive Brawler, which is that mastery that you have. Don't use it for that one makes me cry. So as you can see there's already scenarios that you want to use. You almost always want to empower a Kick Smash. You can empower Breath of Fire and have it up more often. You can empower Tiger Palm and do more damage. I believe the normal rotation, which is a little bit different for me because I have a legendary chest on my monk, is you basically empower your Keg Smash, then you go ahead and the next empowerment that you use is on the Breath of Fire, then you empower maybe a Tiger Palm, then you empower a Keg Smash, then you empower a Breath of Fire, and you kind of get into that rhythm as you're using your energy and everything, which I'm going to show you how it actually plays out in a second or two. Highly recommend you take that talent, learn it, love it. It gives you, again, another level of control over your monk, that's what they're all about. Control the damage intake and make it on your terms. And then you have Elusive Dance. Purifying Brew now clears an additional 15% of damage delayed with Stagger. It also grants up to 20% dodge and damage done for 6 seconds based on level of Stagger damage purified. So if it's red, 20%. If it's yellow, it's like 15%. And if it's green, it's like 10%. I think it works out to be about those levels. This talent I don't really see where you'd want to use it. Maybe if you just want the additional damage bonus, but Blackout Combo does more damage. I think it's just not something that you would really want to take. Now to talk a little bit about the artifact, not so much the path, but the artifact itself, the abilities and everything that it gives you. You have full kick, increases the damage of kick smash by 10%. You gain 3% critical strike chance for 3 seconds after dodging or healing from Gift of the Ox orbs. Gift of the Ox summons an additional healing sphere when your health drops below 35%. So whenever you drop below 35, it's going to summon a sphere for you. Keep that in mind, because a lot of times you can really float for a long time on that healing orb. It can heal you for a substantial amount and then boost you above 35. When you hit 35, you get another healing sphere. Keep that in mind. Facepalm. Tiger Palm has a 30% chance to deal 300% of normal damage and reduce the remaining cooldown of your brews by 1 additional second. It's random, it just happens every once in a while, but it encourages you to always throw in a Tiger Palm when energy is allowing you. Dragonfire Brew. After using Breath of Fire, you breathe fire 2 additional times, each dealing a bit of fire damage. Then you come over to Potent Kick, increase the duration of your Iron Skin Brew. Hot Blooded is something important to keep in mind because it makes the damage of Breath of Fire burning effect be more, but it also causes that target to deal less damage to you by 6%. So when you Breath of Fire something, that thing is going to do less damage to you by 6% for the duration of Breath of Fire. So it's damage reduction. Then you have increased the critical strike chance of your Blackout Strike, and then each time Gift of the Ox generates a healing sphere, it has a 20% chance to instead generate a greater healing sphere. I only have 28 because I have 4 ranks, so I have a relic, so it's 15% chance to instead generate a greater healing sphere that heals for twice as much every time you proc Gift of the Ox. And remember, you get one whenever you proc under 35% health. Then you have Brew Stash. Activating Purifying Brew or Iron Skin Brew grants you 10% dodge for 4.5 seconds, and I do believe that it, let's see, does it stack? Brew Stash? No, it does not go over 4.5. So you want to keep in mind, if you just spam all your brews, you will be missing out on 10% dodge for 4.5 seconds. It does not stack higher than that amount. Then you come over to Dark Side of the Moon. Blackout Strike also reduces the damage of the target's next auto attack against you by 10%. You already want to use Blackout Strike on cooldown, so keep that in mind. When you Blackout Strike something, it will do less damage to you on the auto attack. Increase your maximum health by 3%. Activating Fortifying Brew or any of your brews, increase your movement speed by 6% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. I mean, sure, that's nice, I guess. It's not something you really care about too much. Smashed increases the range of Keg Smash by 10 yards, so you actually get a very large range on your Keg Smash. It's kind of nice, 25-yard range. And then Fortifying Brew increases the damage delay with Stagger by an additional amount. And then your last Golden Dragon is activating Fortifying Brew grants you 25% dodge for 21 seconds. Which is actually kind of funny because you think when you're able to stagger more damage, you don't want to conversely dodge a bunch of that damage, but you know, it is what it is. And that's what you need to know about how the artifact mixes in with your actual gameplay. What it comes down to, in my opinion at least, is keep in mind when you Breath of Fire something, it does less damage to you. When you Blackout Strike, it'll do less damage on the next auto attack. When you drop below a certain amount, you get a Gift of the Ox Orb. And sometimes they can heal you for a shit ton. So the way it actually plays, if you can see here, I'm tracking Keg Smash, Blackout Strike, Breath of Fire, my Black Ox Brew, my healing elixirs because I have that talent taken. Those are my brew charges, and that's my Expel Harm. If I use a brew charge, you can see the duration of my Iron Skin Brew, and then I can still see how many charges I have of my brews and how long it's going to take to get the next brew. Okay, simple stuff, right? So basically what it ends up happening is I will start the fight and I'll use a brew, Keg Smash. I should have empowered it, but use my brew again. Boom, just using that. And then Black Ox Brew, get my brews back up. Use that up, Breath of Fire. When I Keg Smash, I'm getting my Breath of Fire back. That's because of my legendary chest. Don't pay any attention to that. But as you can see here, we're working up our Iron Skin Brew charges. We're going to be Keg Smashing on cooldown, reducing the time even further. We're going to be Blackout Striking our Tiger Pumps to do just more additional damage because we don't want energy cap. As you can see that we're keeping an eye on our brews. Breath of Fire, just going to go ahead and use a brew. Boom. Now we're not taking any damage, so we don't have to worry about purifying. But essentially, when you get to this point, you now have a little bit of freedom. You can bank the charges and wait until you're taking yellow or red stagger, and then purify it off. I can't purify right now because I don't have any stagger damage on me right now. But as you can see, we already have Black Ox Brew back, and we still have a good number of time on this. So you get to the point where you can just start to like use up the charges, Black Ox Brew, and then you're waiting on those charges again. You're keg smashing, you're tiger palming, you're using Black Ox Strike constantly, and you're getting the cooldown of Black Ox Brew down. You can get to 2, 3, 4 minutes of Iron Skin Brew on you, and if you end a fight with that much Iron Skin Brew, which is actually, this is a very good metric for any monks that are trying to get better. If you end a fight with a large amount of Iron Skin Brew time left, right? If you end it with 2 minutes left, that is a bunch of times that you could have purified and reduced the overall damage that you took over the course of that fight, but instead you wasted it on Iron Skin Brew charge time. Something that you want to keep in mind. I would say that if you end a fight with like 10 seconds of Iron Skin Brew up, and the entire time you were getting hit, you had the buff up, you purified a substantial amount unless you were just sitting on charges. That's kind of what you want to aim for. You don't want to waste your charges. You don't want to waste the Iron Skin Brew time. You want to mitigate as much damage as you can. And again, we roll back into it, pun intended, control. As a Brewmaster, you control the damage that you take. That is the strength of a Brewmaster tank. And really, that's what you need to keep in mind in the Legion landscape right now. 7.1.5 going into 7.2. Monks are seeing a lot more play because of their control. Their ability to take Mystic Vitality and make a lot of magic damage and physical damage be turned into a dot, mitigated, and purified away. Control is the name of the game. While I think the Guardian Druid, especially right now, is the best tank, it's simple, it has a lot of easy ways to be better at it, and it just gives you constant, stable, just a rock that's solid that will take damage in a certain way and just be fine. A monk is able to play with the damage. It's able to dance around it, to shrug it off. And it's very, very powerful. That's why you see them in a lot of fights, especially like Mythic Gul'dan. They just tank Mythic Gul'dan and they're fine. They're absolutely fine. You'd be surprised how much damage a Brewmaster can take at once and not dip below 50% health and not get trucked, as long as you have control over your charges. But that's pretty much it for the Brewmaster Monk. Overall, I would have to say they're probably the second strongest and sleeper hit of all the tanks. 7.2 changes are kind of making them look like they might become the best tanks, depending on how much more magic damage is coming out. Of note that I want to talk about, at least as far as legendaries, I have the legendary that's the chest piece, which when you keg smash, your remaining cooldown on Breath of Fire is reset. What that means is that instead of me using my blackout combo on Breath of Fire to reduce that and have it up more often, I just don't. I just use it on Tiger Palm, because it makes this chest alone makes it so my Breath of Fire damage reduction dot is up 100% of the time, so I never have to worry about it again as long as I'm keg smashing on cooldown. Beyond that, I mean, you have these wrists that are amazing for anything that's AoE. Every time you dodge or an enemy misses you, the remaining cooldown of your brews is reduced by 1 second. That's crazy strong. You then have Purifying Brew instantly heals for up to 25% of the purified stagger damage. You're constantly taking damage, so you should never be at full health, so it's going to give you some healing value there. You have Breath of Fire, reduces the cooldown of Fortifying Brew by 2 seconds, up to 6 seconds every time you cast it for every enemy they hit, which is nice because, again, pure Fortifying Brew has such a long cooldown. I know that a lot of the tank classes have this, where they reduce their big cooldown by a certain amount with some sort of spell. For example, my Warrior have the ring that Seal Slime reduces the cooldown on Shield's wall. I don't feel like it's that necessary, but for Fortifying Brew being as long as it is, I think it's fantastic for that. And then you have this ring which increases the duration of stagger by 3 seconds, just kind of smoothing it out even more. So a lot of interesting choices for the Brewmaster. Again, I just find that their forte is control. While the Guardian Druid is solid and stable and always consistent, the Brewmaster is the one that's able to perform some crazy amazing feats because of the level of control. And as long as you're a good player and able to maximize that mastery, it's just fantastic play. Great tank overall. But anyways, guys, that's my Brewmaster video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I'll see you in the next one.